The snow was falling so hard that Emma could barely see the Christmas lights blurring through her frozen tears. She pulled her children closer against the side of the broken-down car, their small bodies shivering despite the layers of clothes they wore. Sophie, 8 years old, tried to be brave, but her lips were turning blue. Little Daniel, only 6, had stopped asking when they could go home because there was no home to go back to. The old red sedan had given up 3 hours ago, right in the middle of downtown Hartford, Connecticut. The engine had made a terrible grinding sound, then simply died. Emma had tried everything, turning the key again and again until the battery was completely drained. Now the car was just a cold metal shell, covered in snow, useless. Around them the city square was alive with Christmas magic. 2 massive decorated trees stood like golden towers, their lights twinkling against the dark winter sky. Families walked by, laughing, carrying shopping bags, heading home to warm houses and hot dinners. Christmas carols played from speakers hidden somewhere in the square. It all felt like a cruel joke. Emma's hands were numb. She rubbed Daniel's arms, trying to create some warmth through friction. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more hopeless than the last. Her phone had died an hour ago. She couldn't afford to pay the bill this month. The women's shelter was full. She'd called them yesterday. Her sister lived 3 states away and wasn't answering emails. The last of their money had gone to gas and the cheapest motel room 2 nights ago. "Mummy, I'm so cold," Daniel whispered, his voice so small it broke her heart into even smaller pieces. "I know, baby. I know." Emma fought back tears. She had to stay strong. They needed her to be strong. Sophie looked up at her mother with those wise, sad eyes that no 8-year-old should have. "Is Daddy watching us from heaven?" she asked quietly. Emma's throat tightened. Michael had been gone for 7 months. A heart attack at 34. Nobody saw it coming. One morning he was kissing them goodbye before work, and by evening he was gone. The medical bills had swallowed their savings. Then came the mortgage payments they couldn't make. Then the eviction notice. Then living in the car, moving from parking lot to parking lot, trying to keep the children safe, clean, fed. She had tried so hard. She'd worked 2 part-time jobs while the kids were in school, but it wasn't enough. Childcare costs ate up most of what she earned. When they lost the apartment, she lost both jobs. No address, no way to shower regularly, no reliable transportation. The car had been their last refuge, and now even that was gone. "Yes, sweetheart," Emma finally answered, her voice cracking. "Daddy's watching us. He's—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally across the square. Emma wrapped her arms around both children, using her body to shield them. Daniel's teeth were chattering so hard she could hear them clicking together. Sophie had gone very quiet, which scared Emma even more than the crying. She knew about hypothermia. She knew the signs. The confusion, the sleepiness, the quiet acceptance. They were in real danger now. "We need to move," Emma said, trying to sound calm. "We need to find somewhere warm." But where? Every shop was closing. The church across the square had finished its Christmas Eve service an hour ago, and the doors were locked. The police station was 8 blocks away, and she couldn't carry both children that far in this storm. And what would happen if she went there? Would they take her children away, put them in foster care because she couldn't provide for them? That fear had kept her from asking for help so many times. The terror of losing Sophie and Daniel was worse than the cold, worse than the hunger, worse than anything. "Maybe we could go inside that store," Sophie suggested, pointing to a coffee shop across the street. But even as she said it, Emma could see the workers inside putting chairs on tables, turning off lights. A group of teenagers walked past, laughing loudly, throwing snowballs at each other. They didn't even glance at the family huddled by the car. To them, Emma and her children were invisible, just part of the urban landscape, as unnoticed as the parking meters and trash cans. Emma felt something inside her beginning to crack. Not her determination to protect her children, that would never break, but her belief that things would somehow work out. That belief had been the only thing keeping her going, the tiny flame of hope that had survived every blow life had dealt them. Now, in the bitter wind and blinding snow, that flame was flickering dangerously. Daniel's shivering had become violent, his whole body convulsing. Sophie's face was pale, almost grey. Emma's own fingers had lost all feeling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this cold. "Tell us a story, Mummy," Sophie said softly, like Daddy used to. Emma's heart broke all over again. Michael had been the storyteller in their family. Every night he'd made up elaborate adventures about brave princesses and kind dragons and magical forests. The children had loved it. She'd loved watching him with them, seeing the way his eyes lit up as he spun his tales, hearing the children's delighted laughter. I don't know any good stories, sweetheart. Just try, Sophie pleaded. Please, it'll help Daniel forget about the cold. So Emma began, her voice shaking from cold and emotion. Once upon a time, there was a family who got lost in a snowstorm. But she couldn't continue. The parallel was too painful, too real. This wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical ending waiting for them. That's when she saw him. A man was walking across the square, coming directly toward them. He was tall, wearing a dark coat and a grey knitted scarf. His breath created small clouds in the freezing air. Unlike everyone else who had passed by, he was looking right at them, really seeing them. Emma instinctively pulled her children closer. Stranger danger. She taught Sophie and Daniel about that. But what did you do when you were desperate? When your children were freezing and you had no other options? The man stopped about 10 feet away. His face was kind. Emma noticed that immediately. He had a short beard, dark eyes that looked concerned, not threatening. He seemed to be around 40 years old, well-dressed but not flashy. There was something about him that felt safe. Or maybe she was just so desperate that she wanted to believe he was safe. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was gentle, careful not to frighten them. Emma didn't know how to answer. No, they weren't all right. They were homeless, freezing, and out of options. But admitting that to a stranger felt like opening a door she might not be able to close. "Our car broke down," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the wind. The man looked at the car, then back at them. His expression shifted from concern to something deeper, recognition, perhaps, of just how serious their situation was. He glanced at the children, taking in their blue lips, their violent shivering, the way they pressed against their mother for warmth that she couldn't provide. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "A while," Emma admitted. She couldn't bring herself to say 3 hours. Couldn't admit how completely she'd failed to protect her children. The man was quiet for a moment, making some kind of decision. Then he spoke, and his words would change everything. "Come with me." 3 simple words. But they hung in the freezing air, full of possibility and danger and hope and fear, all mixed together. Emma stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct she had about protecting her children screamed at her not to go anywhere with a stranger. But another instinct, the one focused on survival, was screaming just as loudly that they would die if they stayed here. "I have a warm house," the man continued, as if sensing her hesitation. "Hot food, a fireplace. Your children need to get warm." Please." He took a small step back, giving them space, making himself less threatening. "My name is David Richardson. I'm a teacher at Hartford Middle School. I have a daughter. She's 9. I'm not trying to scare you. I just can't walk away and leave you out here. Not tonight. Not on Christmas Eve." Sophie looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. Daniel had started to cry softly, exhausted and cold beyond bearing. Emma looked at this stranger named David. She looked at her dying car. She looked at the empty square where everyone else had gone home to safety and warmth. She looked at her children's faces, so pale and cold. Sometimes she realized you had to choose between two kinds of danger: the certain danger of staying, or the uncertain danger of trusting. "Okay," she whispered. David's face flooded with relief. He immediately took off his scarf and wrapped it around Daniel. "My truck is right over there," he said, pointing to a dark blue pickup parked nearby. "Let's get you all warm." As they walked across the snowy square, Emma carrying Daniel while David helped Sophie, she felt like she was stepping off a cliff into darkness. She had no idea if this was the right decision. She had no idea if this man was truly kind or if she was making the worst mistake of her life. But her children needed warmth. They needed help. And sometimes, in the coldest moments, you had to believe that kindness still existed in the world, even when you had every reason not to believe in anything anymore. The heat from David's fireplace felt like a miracle against Emma's frozen skin. She sat on the edge of a comfortable brown leather couch, watching as David wrapped Daniel in a thick blanket and placed a mug of hot chocolate in his small hands. Sophie was already curled up in an oversized armchair, her blue lips slowly returning to pink as she sipped from her own steaming mug. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows across the living room walls, and Emma felt something she hadn't felt in months: safety. But the feeling came with guilt. Sharp, cutting guilt that made her stomach turn. "I shouldn't have brought them here," Emma said quietly, her voice trembling. "You don't know us. We could be anyone. This was so reckless of me." David looked up from where he was adjusting Daniel's blanket. His expression was patient, understanding. "You're not reckless. You're a mother trying to protect her children. There's a difference." He walked to the kitchen, an open-plan space connected to the living room, and returned with another blanket, which he gently draped over Emma's shoulders. She flinched slightly at the gesture, not because it frightened her, but because kindness had become so foreign that her body didn't know how to respond to it. "When did you last eat?" David asked. Emma couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? They'd had some crackers from a gas station, she thought, or maybe that was 3 days ago. Time had become blurry, each day bleeding into the next in a haze of survival and exhaustion. "I'm not hungry," she lied. "Mum's always saying that," Sophie said softly from her chair, "but her stomach makes noises at night." Emma felt her cheeks burn with shame. Even her 8-year-old daughter could see through her lies. David didn't comment on it. He simply nodded and returned to the kitchen. Emma heard the refrigerator open, pots being placed on the stove, the sound of chopping. Within minutes, the smell of cooking food filled the house. Garlic butter, something savory that made Emma's stomach clench with desperate hunger. She looked around the room, really seeing it for the first time. It was a nice house, comfortable, but not ostentatious. Family photos lined the mantel above the fireplace. Most showed David with a young girl, his daughter, Emma assumed. She had dark hair like him, pulled back in a ponytail in most pictures, and the same kind eyes. In several photos there was a woman too, beautiful, with a warm smile, her arm around David's waist. But Emma noticed something. The most recent photos showed only David and his daughter. The woman had disappeared from the frames. "That's my wife," David said quietly. Emma hadn't realized he'd returned from the kitchen. He was looking at the photos too, his expression a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "Rebecca. She died 2 years ago. Cancer." Emma's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." So am I," David said simply. He sat down in the chair opposite her, his hands folded between his knees. "Our daughter, Lily, was 7 when it happened. She's 9 now. She's spending Christmas Eve with Rebecca's parents. They always have her on Christmas Eve. It's It's important to them to feel close to their daughter, I think." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood loss, who knew that some griefs were too deep for easy words. "My husband died 7 months ago," Emma heard herself saying. "Heart attack. He was 34. David's eyes filled with compassion. "I'm sorry. That's recent." "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." Emma pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Michael was everything. The strong one, the stable one. He had the good job, the benefits, the plan for our future. I was just supposed to take care of the kids and work part-time. We had it all figured out. Her voice broke on the last words. David waited, not pushing, just listening. When he died, everything fell apart so fast. The medical bills, the mortgage, the credit cards, we'd lived paycheck to paycheck even with his income. Without it. She shook her head. "I tried. I worked 2 jobs. I sold everything we owned that had any value. But it wasn't enough, and then we lost the apartment, and the car was all we had left. Until tonight," David said gently. "Until tonight," Emma repeated. She looked at her children, both fighting sleep as the warmth and hot chocolate worked their magic. "I'm terrified, you know. Terrified that child services will find out we were living in a car. Terrified they'll take Sophie and Daniel away from me because I couldn't keep a roof over their heads." "They won't," David said firmly. "Not if I can help it." Emma looked at him sharply. "You don't even know us. Why would you help us?" David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "When Rebecca was sick, we went through our savings in 6 months. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments, the out-of-network specialists, it all added up so fast. We were drowning in bills. I had to sell our first house. We moved into this smaller place. I took out loans I'm still paying off." He stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "People helped us. Friends, family, even strangers from our church who heard about our situation. They brought meals. They paid for a house cleaner so I could spend time with Rebecca. They set up a fund for Lily's future. Without them, we wouldn't have survived." He turned back to face Emma. "So when I saw you tonight, sitting there in the snow with your children, I saw us. I saw what we could have become if people hadn't reached out their hands." Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't even try to stop them. "This isn't charity," David continued. "This is just humanity, passing on what was given to me. You'd do the same if our situations were reversed." "I would," Emma whispered. "I would do exactly the same." David smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "I know you would. I could see that the moment I met you. The way you held your children, the way you were trying to shield them with your own body. You're a fighter. You're strong. You've just been fighting alone for too long." The timer in the kitchen beeped. David excused himself and returned with bowls of soup, thick, creamy tomato soup with chunks of bread on the side. Emma's hands shook as she took the bowl. The first spoonful was almost painful. Her body had forgotten what it felt like to be nourished. Sophie and Daniel ate eagerly, color returning to their faces, energy coming back to their movements. Emma watched them eat with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. How many times had they gone to bed hungry while she told them everything was fine? "After you eat, I'll show you to the guest room," David said. "It has a double bed and a pull-out couch. You can all sleep together if that makes you more comfortable." "We can't impose," Emma started. "You're not imposing," David interrupted gently. "Please, stay, at least through Christmas. Let your children have one normal holiday. Let yourself have one night where you don't have to be afraid." Emma looked at Sophie and Daniel, at their faces finally relaxed, finally warm, finally safe. She thought about the alternative, going back to the broken car, to the freezing streets, to the constant terror of every passing police car and social worker. "Okay," she said quietly, "just through Christmas." But even as she said it, she wondered what would happen after Christmas. Where would they go? What would they do? The problems that had driven them to that snowy square hadn't disappeared. They were just temporarily hidden behind the warmth of David's fireplace and the kindness in his eyes. After dinner, David led them upstairs. The guest room was cozy, cream-colored walls, a queen-sized bed with a thick comforter, and a couch that pulled out into another bed. There were clean towels on the dresser, and David showed them the bathroom across the hall. "Take a hot shower," he said to Emma. "All of you. Take as long as you need. There's shampoo, soap, everything you need. And I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They're Rebecca's. We're about the same size, I think." The mention of his dead wife's clothes should have felt strange, but it didn't. It felt like another gift, freely given. After David left, Emma helped both children shower first. She washed their hair, scrubbed their skin until it was pink and clean, and wrapped them in enormous towels that smelled like lavender. She found the clothes David had left, soft pajamas that were still warm from the dryer. Sophie's were pink with stars, Daniel's were blue with dinosaurs. They were Lily's, Emma realized, David's daughter's clothes, shared without hesitation. When the children were settled in bed, their hair still damp, their faces peaceful in the soft lamplight, Emma took her own shower. The hot water was almost overwhelming. She stood under the spray for a long time, letting it wash away weeks of grime and stress and fear. She used the expensive shampoo, the good soap, and when she finally emerged wrapped in a fluffy towel, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked like a stranger, thin, pale, hollow-eyed. When had she gotten so thin? When had those dark circles appeared under her eyes? She looked like someone who'd been surviving, not living. The clothes David had left fit perfectly, soft yoga pants and a comfortable sweater. As she pulled them on, Emma felt a strange connection to the woman who had worn them before. Rebecca, who had died too young, leaving behind a husband and daughter who loved her. Rebecca, who had probably stood in this very bathroom, looking at herself in this very mirror. When Emma returned to the guest room, both children were asleep. She stood by the bed, watching their chests rise and fall, listening to their soft breathing. For the first time in 7 months, they looked peaceful, safe, like children should look. Emma climbed into bed beside them, pulling them close. The sheets were clean and soft, the pillow was comfortable, and the room was warm. Outside she could hear the wind howling, the snow still falling, but they were inside. They were warm. They were safe. As Emma drifted towards sleep, her last conscious thought was of David's words. "You've just been fighting alone for too long." Maybe, she thought, maybe she didn't have to fight alone anymore. Maybe there were still good people in the world. Maybe there was still hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new questions about the future. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, Emma allowed herself to believe in miracles again. Even if that miracle was simply a warm bed, full stomachs, and the kindness of a stranger who understood loss. Emma woke to the sound of children's laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in so long that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Sunlight streamed through the guest room window, bright and clear. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world blanketed in fresh snow. Emma sat up slowly, her body still exhausted but warmer and more rested than it had been in months. Sophie and Daniel's side of the bed was empty, their blankets thrown back. Panic shot through her. Where were they? She rushed out of the bedroom, her heart pounding, and stopped at the top of the stairs. The laughter was coming from downstairs. Children's voices, 3 of them. And then David's deeper voice, warm and amused. Emma descended the stairs quietly, following the sounds to the living room. What she saw made her throat tighten with emotion. Sophie and Daniel were sitting on the floor in front of the Christmas tree, a beautiful tree Emma hadn't even noticed last night, playing with a dark-haired girl who must be Lily. David's daughter was showing them a board game, explaining the rules with patient enthusiasm. David sat on the couch, watching them with a soft smile, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up and saw Emma standing in the doorway. "Merry Christmas," he said gently. "Mommy!" Daniel jumped up and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Lily's here, and look, Mr. David has hot chocolate and pancakes." "We didn't want to wake you," David explained, standing. "The kids were up early, and Lily got home about an hour ago. I hope that's okay." Emma felt overwhelmed. Okay, her children were playing, laughing, being children again. When was the last time that had been okay? "It's more than okay," she managed to say. Lily looked up at Emma with curious but friendly eyes. She had her father's kind expression and something of her mother's warmth that Emma had seen in the photos. "Hi," the girl said shyly. "I'm Lily. Dad told me about you guys. Sophie says you have a car that broke down." Sophie shot her mother an apologetic look, as if revealing even that much information had been a betrayal of trust. Emma's instinct was to feel exposed, vulnerable, but then she saw how Lily was looking at Sophie and Daniel. There was no judgment there, no pity, just genuine interest and acceptance. "That's right," Emma said carefully. "Our car had some trouble last night." "That's really bad luck on Christmas Eve," Lily said matter-of-factly. "But Dad's really good at fixing things. Maybe he can help." David cleared his throat. "Why don't we have breakfast first? Then we can talk about the car." The dining table was set beautifully, not fancy but warm and welcoming. There were pancakes, fresh fruit, scrambled eggs and bacon, orange juice for the kids, coffee for the adults. Emma sat down, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life, a normal life, the kind of life she used to have. As they ate, Emma watched the children interact. Daniel, usually so shy and withdrawn, was chattering away with Lily about his favorite dinosaurs. Sophie, who had become so serious and worried over the past months, was smiling, really smiling, as she helped Daniel cut his pancakes. "Lily's grandparents dropped her off this morning," David explained. "They always have her on Christmas Eve, and I have her on Christmas Day. It's our tradition." "Was Santa good to you?" Emma asked Lily, trying to participate in the normalcy of the moment, even though her own children hadn't received anything from Santa this year. Couldn't receive anything. There had been no money, no address for packages, no way to maintain the magic. Lily's face lit up. "Yes. Grandma and Grandpa got me art supplies and new books, and Dad got me—" She stopped suddenly, glancing at Sophie and Daniel, then at her father with questioning eyes. David nodded slightly, and Emma saw an entire conversation happen in that small gesture. Permission granted. "Dad got me a new bike," Lily continued carefully, "but it's too big for me. I'll grow into it, but right now it's kind of too tall." She looked at Sophie. "How old are you?" 8, Sophie said quietly. "I'm 9, Lily said, "but you're probably taller than me. Do you know how to ride a bike?" Sophie nodded, her eyes suddenly bright with longing. She'd had a bike once, a purple one with streamers on the handles. They'd sold it 2 months ago for grocery money. "Maybe you could try mine," Lily offered, and Emma could see David's coaching in the casual way she said it. "You know, to see if it's the right size, because if it's too big for me but perfect for you, that would be good to know, for when I grow." The kindness of it. The careful way this 9-year-old girl was trying to give without making Sophie feel like she was receiving charity brought tears to Emma's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but not before David saw. He met her gaze across the table, and his expression said, "I know. I understand. After breakfast, David suggested the kids play outside in the snow while he and Emma talked. He helped all three children into warm coats and boots. Lily had extra winter gear that fit Sophie and Daniel perfectly, another careful gift disguised as coincidence. When the children were outside, shrieking with joy as they built a snowman in the front yard, David and Emma sat at the kitchen table with fresh cups of coffee. "You staged that," Emma said quietly. "The bike thing." "Lily's idea," David admitted. "She's good at that, seeing what people need and finding ways to help without making them feel small. She learned it during Rebecca's illness. People were constantly trying to help us, and Lily figured out early which kinds of help felt good and which kinds felt like pity." Emma wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. Through the window, she could see her children playing, their faces bright with joy. When was the last time they'd played in the snow? When was the last time they'd just been allowed to be kids? "I can't accept all this," Emma said, her voice tight. "The clothes, the food, the bike. David, I can't pay you back. I have $17 to my name. That's it. $17 and a broken-down car that probably isn't even worth fixing." "I'm not asking you to pay me back," David said calmly. "But I have to. I can't just take—" "Why not?" David interrupted. "Why can't you just take? Why does accepting help have to be transactional?" Emma stared at him. "Because that's how the world works. Nothing is free. Everything has a price, even kindness." David's expression became serious. "Is that what you want to teach your children? That kindness always comes with strings attached? That accepting help makes you weak or indebted?" "No, of course not, but—" "Emma." David leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You're in crisis mode. You've been in crisis mode for 7 months. Every decision you've made has been about immediate survival. I understand that. I've been there. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's allowing yourself to receive so that you can recover and eventually give to someone else." Emma felt something inside her beginning to crack. The wall she'd built around herself, the armor she'd worn to survive, it was starting to crumble. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of trusting this. Of letting my children get comfortable here. Of believing that things might actually be okay." She looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "Because what happens after Christmas, David? Where do we go? What do we do? The problems that put us in that car haven't disappeared. We're still homeless. I still don't have a job. We still have nowhere to go." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if you stayed here, just for a while until you get back on your feet?" Emma's breath caught. "We couldn't." "Why not? This house has 4 bedrooms. Lily and I only use 2. The guest room is just sitting empty most of the time. You could stay there, get your bearings, look for work without the pressure of sleeping in your car every night." "That's insane," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You don't even know us." "We could be—" "You could be what? A widowed mother trying to protect her children, because that's what you are. That's all you are." David's voice was earnest, passionate. "Emma, I'm not offering this out of pity. I'm offering it because I have resources you need, and you have something I need too. What could I possibly have that you need?" David smiled. "Company, purpose, a reason to cook meals that aren't just microwaved leftovers. Lily needs to see that our family can open up again, that we can let people in without betraying Rebecca's memory. And honestly, I need to remember what it feels like to help someone, to make a real difference instead of just going through the motions of my life." Emma couldn't speak. The offer was too big, too generous, too impossible to accept, but it was also everything she needed. "Just think about it," David said. "Stay through the weekend at least. Let's see how it goes. And in the meantime, I know someone who can look at your car." He owes me a favor, and he does good work." Before Emma could respond, the front door burst open and all three children tumbled inside, covered in snow, their cheeks red and their eyes bright. "Mum! Mum! Lily showed us how to make snow angels!" Daniel was so excited he could barely get the words out. "And Mr. David said maybe later we can make cookies," Sophie added. Lily looked at her father. Can we, Dad? Can we make Christmas cookies, please?" David looked at Emma, and in his eyes she saw the question. "What do you say? Can we do this? Can we try?" Emma looked at her children, really looked at them. They were smiling, they were warm, they were safe. They were being children again, not tiny adults burdened with worries no child should carry. "Cookies sound wonderful," Emma heard herself say. The afternoon passed in a blur of flour and sugar and laughter. The children decorated cookies with more enthusiasm than skill, creating colorful disasters that tasted perfect anyway. David put on Christmas music, and Lily taught Sophie and Daniel a silly dance she'd learned at school. Emma found herself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in months. But as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and gold, Emma felt reality creeping back in. This was temporary. This was borrowed. This wasn't their life. Or was it? She watched David helping Daniel reach the higher branches of the Christmas tree with an ornament. She watched Lily and Sophie huddled together on the couch, sharing a book. She felt the warmth of the house, smelled the lingering scent of cookies and pine needles. Maybe, she thought, maybe this could be the start of something. Not a permanent solution. She wasn't naive enough to believe in fairy tales, but maybe a bridge. A way to get from drowning to swimming, to eventually reaching the shore. David caught her eye and smiled, and Emma felt that crack in her armor widen just a little bit more. Maybe it was okay to trust. Maybe it was okay to hope. Maybe it was okay to accept help without knowing exactly how she'd ever repay it. Maybe that was what Christmas was really about. Not perfect families and flawless celebrations, but broken people finding ways to help each other heal. As the children settled in front of the TV to watch a Christmas movie, David sat down next to Emma on the couch. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing us. For not walking by." David's eyes were serious. "Thank you for trusting me, for coming with me." That took courage. Emma thought about that moment in the square, the snow, the cold, the fear, and then those three simple words, "Come with me." Sometimes she realized the bravest thing you could do was accept an outstretched hand. "We'll stay," she said quietly, "through the weekend, and then we'll see." David nodded, understanding that this was huge for her. "We'll see," he agreed. Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled on neighboring houses. Inside, three children laughed at the movie playing on the screen, and two broken people sat together in comfortable silence, both beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to stay broken forever. 3 weeks after that frozen Christmas Eve, Emma stood at the kitchen window watching her children play in the backyard and realized she had forgotten what fear tasted like. Not completely, of course. Fear still lived inside her, a quiet companion that whispered warnings about the future, about depending on others, about the fragility of happiness. But it no longer consumed her every waking moment. It no longer made her hands shake when she heard sirens or saw police cars. It no longer kept her awake at night, calculating how many days they could survive on $17. The weekend had stretched into a week, then 2, then 3. David never pushed, never demanded a timeline. He simply made space for them, physical space in his home, emotional space in his life. And slowly, carefully, Emma had begun to believe that maybe this wasn't temporary, maybe this was real, but nothing worth having came without challenges. The first real test had come on New Year's Day, when David's neighbour, Mrs. Patterson, had knocked on the door with a casserole and curiosity that barely masked judgment. "I heard you have house guests," she'd said, her sharp eyes taking in Emma standing beside David in the kitchen. For quite a while now, Emma had felt herself shrinking, preparing for the questions she'd been dreading. Who are you? Why are you here? What kind of woman moves into a widower's house with her children? But David had simply smiled. "Emma and her kids are staying with us while they get back on their feet. Their car broke down on Christmas Eve, and we've been helping them figure out their next steps." "I see." Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she saw more than David was saying. "And how long will that take?" "As long as it needs to," David had replied, his voice pleasant but firm. "Emma's been looking for work, and we're exploring some options." After Mrs. Patterson left, with her casserole reluctantly accepted and her curiosity thoroughly unsatisfied, Emma had felt the old panic rising. "She thinks we're together," Emma had said, her voice tight. "She thinks I'm some kind of opportunist, taking advantage of you." David had looked at her seriously. "Do you care what Mrs. Patterson thinks, don't you?" "Not particularly." He'd poured them both coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "Emma, people are going to think what they want to think. Some will see this situation as inappropriate or suspicious. Others will understand that sometimes people just need help. We can't control what they think. We can only control what we know to be true." "And what's true?" Emma had asked quietly. "That you're a mother who needed help. That I had help to give. That our children are thriving. That we're doing our best to honor the people we lost, while also moving forward with our lives." He'd met her eyes. "That's the truth. Everything else is just noise." But the noise had gotten louder. At the grocery store, Emma felt the weight of stares. At Lily's school, where David had enrolled Sophie and Daniel temporarily, other parents whispered. Even David's colleagues at work had started making comments, carefully worded, seemingly innocent questions that carried judgment underneath. The pressure had built until one evening 2 weeks after Christmas, Emma had broken down. "I should go," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "We should go. I'm making your life complicated. People are talking. Lily's probably hearing things at school. This isn't fair to any of you." David had been helping Lily with homework while Emma cooked dinner. They'd fallen into routines so naturally it scared her. He'd looked up from the math worksheet with surprise. "Where would you go?" Emma had no answer. The car had been fixed. David's friend had done it for free, refusing payment. But it was still just a car, not a home, not a solution. "I don't know," she'd admitted. "But I can't keep taking from you. I can't keep letting my children get attached to this life when it's not really ours." Lily had looked between them with wise, worried eyes. "Are Sophie and Daniel leaving?" The pain in the little girl's voice had cracked something open in Emma's chest. Over the past weeks, Lily had bloomed. The quiet, careful child had become more confident, more joyful. She told David that having Sophie and Daniel there was like having the siblings I always wanted. "I don't want them to leave," Lily had said, her voice small. "Please, Dad, can't they stay?" David had knelt beside his daughter. "That's not my decision, sweetheart. That's up to Emma." And then he'd looked at Emma with an expression that made her breath catch. It wasn't romantic. Nothing between them had been romantic, but it was something deeper than friendship. It was partnership, understanding. A shared recognition that their broken pieces somehow fit together in a way that made both of them more whole. "Stay," he'd said simply. "Not as my house guests, not as charity cases. Stay as family." Emma had felt the word settle over her like a blanket. Family, not the family she'd lost, but a different kind of family. chosen, built from shared loss and mutual support, and children who loved each other without reservation. "I got a job offer," Emma had said quietly. It was true. She'd interviewed at 3 places over the past 2 weeks, and one had called back. A position at a local non-profit, helping other families in crisis. The irony wasn't lost on her. It doesn't pay much. Not enough for an apartment, not right away. But it's a start. It's a great start, David had agreed. And while you're building up savings, you can stay here. Pay what you can toward groceries and utilities when you're able. But mostly, just be here, help with the kids. Share the household responsibilities. Let's do this together. That conversation had been the turning point. Emma had stopped thinking of herself as a temporary guest and started thinking of herself as part of a household. She'd taken over the grocery shopping and meal planning. She'd started driving all 3 kids to school in the mornings. She'd organized the chaos of winter coats and backpacks and homework folders. She'd found the rhythm of this new life and let herself sink into it. Now, 3 weeks after that frozen Christmas Eve, Emma watched Daniel and Sophie playing with Lily in the snow. They were building a fort, their laughter carrying through the cold air. Inside, David was preparing hot chocolate, the good kind, with real cocoa and marshmallows, exactly the way all 3 kids liked it. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd had before, but a life nonetheless. A real life, with routines and stability and hope. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Emma dried her hands and went to answer it, surprised to find Mrs. Patterson standing there again. But this time, the older woman's face wasn't pinched with judgment. It was softer, almost apologetic. "I wanted to bring these," Mrs. Patterson said, holding out a bag. "Winter clothes for your children. My grandchildren have outgrown them, and I thought your kids might need them." Emma took the bag, stunned. "Thank you." "That's very kind." Mrs. Patterson nodded, then hesitated. "I owe you an apology. When I first heard about your situation, I assumed things that weren't fair. But I've been watching. I've seen you taking the children to school. I've seen you at the grocery store, carefully counting coupons. I've seen how hard you're trying." She paused. "My daughter went through something similar years ago. After her divorce, she and my grandchildren had nowhere to go. If someone hadn't helped her, I don't know what would have happened." Emma felt tears prickling her eyes. "I'm trying my best. I can see that. And David, he's a good man. He deserves happiness again. You all do." Mrs. Patterson smiled, a real smile this time. "I just wanted you to know that some of us understand. Some of us are rooting for you." After Mrs. Patterson left, Emma stood holding the bag of clothes, overwhelmed by the simple gift. It wasn't just the clothes, it was what they represented: acceptance, community, the recognition that she wasn't alone in this struggle. David came up behind her. "Everything okay?" Emma turned to him, tears on her cheeks but a smile on her face. "Everything's okay." That evening, after dinner and homework and the chaos of 3 children getting ready for bed, Emma sat with David in the living room. The fire was crackling, casting warm shadows on the walls. The children were asleep upstairs, Sophie and Lily now sharing a room by choice, Daniel in what had become his room, with dinosaur posters on the walls and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. "I start the job on Monday," Emma said. "I know. You nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. It feels good to have a purpose again, to be building towards something instead of just surviving." David nodded. "Rebecca used to say that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new, someone who carries the past but isn't defined by it." She sounds like she was wise. She was. You would have liked her. David smiled. And she would have liked you. She always believed in helping people. She would have insisted we do exactly what we're doing. Emma was quiet for a moment. Do you ever feel guilty about moving forward? Every day, David said honestly. But I also think Rebecca would be disappointed in me if I stopped living. She fought so hard to stay alive. It would dishonor her memory to waste the life she didn't get to have. He looked at Emma. Your husband would probably feel the same way. Emma thought about Michael, his laugh, his kindness, the way he'd always put his family first. He would have hated seeing us in that car. He would have been so angry at himself for leaving us in that situation. It wasn't his fault. He didn't choose to die. I know, but I blamed him anyway for a while. Blamed him for leaving us? Blamed him for not having better life insurance or more savings. Blamed him for making me dependent when I should have been stronger. Emma wiped away tears. I'm working on forgiving him. And myself. That's all any of us can do, David said gently. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft, gentle flakes that looked magical in the streetlights. I want to pay rent, Emma said suddenly. Once I have a few paychecks saved up, I want to contribute, not as a guest, but as someone who lives here, someone who has a stake in this household. David considered this. Okay, we can figure out something fair, but Emma, he turned to face her. This isn't about money. I don't need your rent money. I need what you're already giving. Partnership, companionship, another adult who understands what it's like to be a single parent. Someone who can laugh at the chaos with me instead of facing it alone. You're saying I provide emotional labor, Emma said with a small smile. I'm saying you provide exactly what I need, just by being here, by being you. David's expression was serious. We're building something here, not a romance. I'm not ready for that, and I don't think you are either, but a family, a different kind of family, one that works for all of us. Emma felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. I like this family. So do I. Upstairs, they could hear the soft sound of children sleeping. The house was warm, safe, full of the kind of peace that comes from knowing everyone you love is under one roof and protected. 3 weeks ago, Emma had been freezing in a broken car with no hope and no future. She'd been at the absolute bottom, certain that she would lose her children, lose everything. And then a stranger had said 3 words, "Come with me." Those words had changed everything. Not because David had solved all her problems. He hadn't. The grief was still there. The financial struggles were still real. The uncertainty about the future remained. But she wasn't facing any of it alone anymore. Emma stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling. Other families were sitting in cold cars, wondering how they'd survive. Other single parents were lying awake at night, terrified of losing their children. She couldn't help all of them, but maybe, just maybe, she could help one. When she was stronger, when she was stable, when she had something to give, she could be the person who stopped and said, "Come with me." That was how it worked, she realized. You received help when you needed it, and then you passed it on. You broke the cycle of suffering by refusing to walk past someone else's pain. David joined her at the window. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about paying it forward," Emma said. "About how someday I want to be the person who helps someone else the way you helped us." "You will be," David said with certainty. "You already are. Every day you get up and keep fighting. Every time you show your children that it's okay to accept help and to trust people. You're teaching them to be the kind of adults who help others." Emma leaned her head against the cold window glass. "I never thanked you properly, for that night, for seeing us, for stopping when everyone else walked by." "You thank me every day," David said. "Every time you make dinner, every time you help Lily with her homework, every time you make me laugh. That's thanks enough." They stood together in the quiet house, two people who had lost everything and somehow found each other, two people who were learning that family wasn't always about blood or marriage. Sometimes it was about choosing to stay, about building something new from broken pieces, about saying yes to an outstretched hand, even when you were terrified. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside David's house, inside their house, there was warmth and light and the sound of children breathing softly in their sleep. Emma thought about that moment in the square, when she'd had to choose between two kinds of danger, when she'd been so scared, but had trusted anyway. "Come with me," David had said. And she had. That choice had saved her life. It had saved her children. But more than that, it had taught her something profound, that hope wasn't foolish, that kindness still existed, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was accept help instead of facing everything alone. As Emma climbed the stairs to check on the children one last time before bed, she paused outside each room. Daniel was curled up with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, his face peaceful. In the girls' room, Sophie and Lily were sleeping hand in hand, like real sisters. This was her family now. Not the family she'd lost, but the family she'd found, chosen, built from loss and love, and the willingness to trust a stranger on the coldest night of the year. Emma whispered a prayer, to Michael, to Rebecca, to whoever might be listening. "Thank you for sending us help. Thank you for David. Thank you for second chances." And then, with a full heart and quiet tears of gratitude rolling down her cheeks, Emma went to bed in her own room, in a warm house, knowing that tomorrow she would wake up safe. The story that had begun in a frozen square on Christmas Eve had found its ending. But really, Emma knew it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. And this time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. This time, she had hope. The end